Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to tonight's deep dive conversation. A couple of announcements before we get started. I wanted to thank everybody for coming out to the feast night. That was a big success. We had a whole bunch of people here and we are so thankful we got to see you all and hang out and talk and share a meal together. And so to continue that energy, we're again, a reminder, we're not live streaming this Sunday, and this will be a traditional sermon Sunday, songs, sermon, and Nick is going to continue our conversation on Ephesians on Sunday. And so tonight, I believe we're going through chapters 5 and 6 of Ephesians to continue that conversation and prepare for Sunday. So I'll hand it over to Noah to get us started.
Welcome everyone to the regular deep dive on Wednesdays that we do here at Wayfarers Christian Church. It's been a long week already for me. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good. Got set for classes, so I'm gonna get started on Monday. So I'm gonna get the feel of what it's like to go back to school.
Awesome.
Out for several years.
Yeah, if you don't know, we do all these live streams, and our church is based in Mid-South Christian College, which is a college that educates young, aspiring Bible scholars and pastors and people that want to start up nonprofits with a mission-minded perspective. So Ashley's doing her first year at Mid-South Christian College. We're super excited about that. So I just finished graduating there, and Jacob is in his last year there, right?
Yep. Ashley's
You're
in her
senior.
first year, and I'm in my last year.
The ironic thing is that I'm older than both.
It is, yeah. That's awesome. So we are working our way. We've been going through a series on the book of Ephesians, actually. We took a break from that last week to take a more broader view of the different views on Paul and understanding Paul, which was really fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That's some of the more nerdy stuff of Paul. But this week we're jumping back into just the straight scripture, and we're going to go through the last part of Ephesians, because I had originally intended to do a two-parter where we did Ephesians 1 through 3 and Ephesians 4 through 6. But as it turned out with the episodes, we ended up doing 1 and 2 mainly in the first week, and we did 3 and 4 mainly in the second week. So we're going to tackle 5 and 6 this week. So I am really excited about that. So feel free to, if you are at home or anywhere, pull up a phone or an iPad or whatever you guys do these days for Bibles and open up to the book of Ephesians. Also of note, I don't know if you mentioned this, I can't remember, so forgive me if this is redundant, but Nick's also going to preach on Ephesians this week, working through all of the stuff, so I'm hoping we're just giving you a whole lot of Ephesians right now.
Oh, yeah.
Which is good. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books. So we finished up to kind of recap what we've been doing over the last couple weeks. We walked through Ephesians 1 through 2, which was more of a look at Paul's perspective on what does the gospel mean for this group of people in Ephesus. What does it mean for their election? What does it mean for them as people, and concepts about the resurrection and the ascension? What does it mean for them in terms of how he thinks about them and what prayers he offers for them? That's more in chapter 3. And then he takes a switch in chapter 4 where he moves more towards calling them to action after giving this long and beautiful section of what the gospel means. And he talks about the expectations he has for them as a church. And we spent a lot of time the last time talking about the unity that he really wants this church to have that frankly isn't really seen right now in America. And we talked a lot about different things that have been some divisive things. We talked about prophecy and apostleship and many of the different elements of just different churches have fallen on different issues, which was really cool. And that's kind of where we ended, was kind of on that note of just a little bit of a lament even for how far away from the book of Ephesians we've kind of gotten in our culture. But I did want to kind of bring it back to what comes next in this book, in this section, and also hopefully end on a more positive note as we go through with this. So what's interesting is all of that, we kind of stopped at verse, I would say 16 of chapter 4, and we didn't really get into verse 17 and following. So I'll go ahead and actually just read that section and begin that section, and then we'll have some thoughts and think about that. So this section goes as follows. It's chapter 4, verse 17. So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding, separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impunity with a continual lust for more. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard in him and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. There's a lot there in that. And you can tell he's switching from this kind of more thrust towards unity, be united, and here's what you should be. You should be a church that's building each other up and things. And now we're moving into really what I would call his beginning of a list of things that he wants this people to emulate and to look like. Does anything strike you in this section? Any thoughts on what he's saying here?
Yeah, I guess verse 17 where it says you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, because I had a conversation. I can't remember exactly how deep we got into it. We probably did, but I think it was also the issue of preaching the gospel to both the Gentiles and the Jews.
Yeah.
And not making it seem like this is something only for the Jews only.
Right.
Certain habits that they had, because I know we brought up the issue of culture, like issue of like the Jews were doing certain things that were not really connected to God, but it was just a cultural thing.
Right.
And I guess here, it almost kind of seems like, in a way, like he's saying the opposite of that. I don't know if somebody else would, like, not to say that's how I think, but I can see how somebody would see it's like, don't live as Gentiles do. Right. Trying to make a distinction between, this is not how we live. The Gentiles are doing something different. We're doing something that is God. And so, but I guess the way that I saw it, I could read it was those verses that talked about how, like, when we get saved, we all become Jews, like spirit.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though you were a Gentile, or somebody could classify you as a Gentile because you're not culturally a Jew, because that's not your race, you're still a Jew spiritually. Yeah. You're not supposed to be living the way that you did previously. You're living the way that we all are called to live now in Christ. So that's just kind of how I saw it, but I can see how people might see it the other way, like that division between.
Yeah. And to note here, I'm not sure he's necessarily. Oftentimes, I think Paul will switch from chapter to chapter in addressing a particular group of people. And I wonder, especially in a group of Ephesus, there would definitely have been some Jews in that community and also some Gentiles in that community. I wonder if this section here is more focused on the Gentile part of the church in specific, because that pull is to his emphasis on don't go after the things that you used to do, for example, seems to suggest that he's talking to Gentiles, because Jews wouldn't have been into as much of that lustful kind of element as much as Gentiles would have been. I mean, there might have been a few, but for the most part, that's a primarily Gentile problem. And that's, if you read the book of Corinthians, that's what he's really dealing with, is a lot of people in Corinth are still doing things that are very wrong to do. And that's because the Gentile culture of that time was so sexually promiscuous, for example. So it has a bit more of, I wonder if he's addressing that, the Gentiles specifically in this section, and telling them, hey, remember that our culture as Gentiles, your culture as a Gentile, is what you're putting off. And I wonder if the language of putting off your old self and putting on your new self is really related to Gentile culture, and they're putting off their old ways of doing things in their culture and putting on this new self as a Gentile. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I can see a lot of. I really think it really ties into the whole putting off your old self to put on the new, because, and like you said, he does say you must no longer live as Gentiles do.
Right.
And so it does appear he's speaking to the Gentiles, saying, "Hey, don't live like your culture is telling you to live, and like you've always done it. You realized at one point that was not the way to live, and you changed, and now you're a part of the church. Don't go back to it. Don't go back to that old life you lived, because that's not how you're supposed to do it."
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. So he moves through that section and then goes into this second section. Jacob, if you don't mind, why don't you read 25 through... just read 25 through 32, and we'll knock out the rest, finish up 4.
Is that all the way to the end? All right, let me find my place.
Sorry, I put you on the spot here.
I always lose it, right, when someone tells me to read it. All right. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. For we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Sorry. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful to build, for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you.
I love this section. I think this section gets overlooked a lot of times when people read Ephesians, because it can kind of get lumped into the just be a good person, and there is actually a lot of really beautiful things that Paul's saying here. First thing I love is in your anger, do not sin. Like the idea of you can still be angry, but don't sin in that anger. I think that's beautiful. And this is actually a quote from the book of Psalms, actually. I can't remember which Psalm it is. It might be Psalm 4.
It was Psalm 4.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's pulled from there. And if you're reading in the NIV, they translate it wrong in Psalm 4. In the NIV, they translate it tremble and do not sin. And I'm like, no, it's anger. But yeah, anyway, that's just a pet peeve of mine when it's like one way in one book of the Bible and a different way in a different book of the Bible. But yeah, I find that really beautiful, because I know some people in my life that are angry of a disposition in some ways, and I know that anger is a topic that's pretty prevalent right now in our society, and I do like that it's not you should never do this. It is be angry and do not sin. Mainly there have been a lot of people that have said that emotion in and of itself is untrustworthy, especially anger, and you should just bottle all that up and never share that with other people. And you should have a measure of self-control over your emotions, and that generally gets translated to young people as never speak your mind.
Yeah.
And I like this distinction that he puts here is in your anger, do not sin. So it's not trying to hold that back. It's expressing that in a way that is not sinful. And I think that's a cool distinction to make.
Yeah. I really, I like to make this point, specific this verse and section and stuff in the ideas of a lot of people will call out being angry and that type, if you get angry, that's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, in that mindset, the Bible records how God gets angry a lot.
Right.
So I'm going to need you to go ahead and explain that for me. But also something else. I love the book of Job for many reasons. But in the book of Job, Job is obviously angry.
Right.
That he is losing everything he's worked so hard to keep. And he feels like God has wronged him. Yet, if you read several of the first couple chapters, they always end with, and Job did not sin against God in this way. And so that he's staying blameless before God in that way. He's questioning. He's like, why? He's mad. He's like, my kids are dead. All my animals are gone. They've been stolen. My servants have been killed. Why? And he's mad. But it does not say he sinned because he was mad or because he was questioning. I think really, and you were kind of hitting on it a little bit, I think we just don't teach people how to control and how to interact with their anger.
Yeah.
And it's not really our parents' fault, or maybe not even their parents' fault. But it's been something that's probably been going on for generations.
Yeah.
Where some groups of people just stop dealing with anger.
Right.
And it's just hurt the rest of us.
Yeah. Because they've just bottled it up.
Yeah.
And that's not the way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so.
Well, and I like that, especially here, it says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. So the idea is not bottle it up and try and keep it contained and then just let it fester inside of you. The idea is get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so the way to get rid of it would be to resolve whatever you're angry about, and that means having conversations with people.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the.
I also think of it in a way that's like when it's don't let the sun go down on your anger is a choice to stay mad. Right. Which means you're festering hatred.
Yeah.
At that point, which is a sin. It's don't hate your brother.
Yeah.
And Jesus relates that to murdering your brother. Being angry is an emotion that can flare up. And when you deal with it, you can deal with it and let it go.
Yeah.
But if you're choosing to hold on to it and not let it go, that's a choice to be angry, which leads to hatred, which then leads to a whole bunch of other mess of issues.
So I think that usually tends to happen when you replay things over and over again. Because I know that has a habit of happening to me. Like it's like my mind just works for like to replay things over and over again, and so you like to analyze things, you like to break it down, you like to analyze what made you mad, why it made you mad, why they continue to keep doing this, and so on and so forth. And I feel like that the more you think about it, the angrier you get about it, and you kind of have to change your mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I will say too, not to make it too real, but you scroll through Facebook and it's pretty easy to get angry pretty quickly when you scroll through it, no matter what your political opinion is. And
that happened to me earlier today.
Yeah, I think I think that this is a call for anybody that's in that position to resolve that. You've got to do something about that. I'm not saying you go and have conflicts all the time with that person that may be posting that, but you do have to make sure that you're not letting the sun go down on your anger when that happens, and that's difficult. Like that's a hard thing to do in these days, but I do think that that's necessary, and I think that there are ways you can do that through playing music and listening to music while to chill down, or talking to a friend. Get off Facebook.
Something that people don't do is people have a tendency to feed their anger.
Yeah.
By constantly going back to the things that are making you angry.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn how to just stop doing that.
Yeah.
Stop feeding into it. I think that even goes back to, I don't know if you read, I think you did read that where it says don't give the devil a foothold.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you do something like that, all it does is just give him more reason to, it's like encouraging your anger.
Yeah.
Like adding fuel to the fire.
Well, it's like a starting of a spiral, and it's because I'm the same as you. I have that same replaying of things, and when you're angry, a lot of times what I'll do is replay whatever the situation is in a fantasy-like setting where I say something that really sticks it to them, you know? Like I have some type of like, oh, if I had said this in this scenario, this would have really shut him up, you know? And like I'll play those kinds of fantasy scenarios in my head to just like enjoy me like saying the right thing or whatever in this moment or whatever.
I have won 100% of my imaginary argument.
Funny how that works. But the whole point of why he's bringing up a lot of these things, and I think this is where people miss out on, is they just see it as a list of be a kind person. But his point is these are the things that cause division, right? So it's anger is one of the reasons that you cause division in the church. So he's like, okay, let's address that issue. Let's not even let anger have a foothold, right? Let's resolve it quickly, get it over with. I find it interesting that the next one he addresses is stealing. They must have had some trouble in Ephesians with people stealing some things. And, you know, that's the next one on his list is like, hey, stealing other things is going to cause division between people. I don't think I need to explain that one, why that's going to happen.
It's like just work to do something. Like instead of stealing stuff, why don't you actually work to be
Yeah. And I mean, that totally makes sense. It's like he's probably dealing with some people that are really struggling right now financially. And they're probably people that have a hard time, like when they come to church and see a rich person that's buying a bunch of stuff and has a bunch of food and they don't have anything, and it can become really easy in that situation to justify, well, I can just take some of what he has. He's already got so much, you know? So like, he's like, hey, that's also going to cause division. The one that I do think is interesting is do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. This one I think is an addressing of gossip and just destructive talking down about other people. But what's funny is this one always got preached to me as like, don't curse, you know, don't like cuss or anything like that growing up. And I don't think that's what this means at all. I think this means don't have any type of derogatory, negative words spoken about another person come out of your mouth.
And as addressing is like for the usage of like don't use cuss words. If you really think what makes a cuss word so bad is the negative connotation they carry, the negative.
Right.
They're putting when you use a cuss word in the way that is the negative way to use it, you're putting someone down.
Yeah.
That's the point of why you're using the word most of the time. But it's also in the ideas of like, but build each other up and kind of those, I can tear someone down using very elegant language.
Yeah, exactly.
Like people have been doing that for years. You can use the cleanest, most wholesome sentence and tear somebody to the core.
Yeah.
like being condescending.
Yeah. And it's very, and so to me, a lot of times, especially people that are really big on the whole, they put cursing up really high.
Yeah.
Right. Really high on the list of terrible things, terrible humans. And then they will say, oh, bless their heart.
And they are speaking that.
And they are not wishing blessings on what they're doing is they're condescending. They're looking down on somebody like, you dumb child. Yeah, and you can hear it in the tone. So you can use words that are meant to actually bless somebody,
right,
and still be talking negative and down and unwholesome. Someone.
Yeah, and for me, most people that know me really well know that like I don't have an issue with cussing. It's one of those things that I don't think is a sin. If you've been around me, you know. But I do feel like exactly what you're saying is there are times when those cuss words do get used in that way that I think is very much a sin. And I think that for me, the distinguishing is not whether or not I use these 4-letter words. It's how I use those 4-letter words.
Well, every country, just about every country and culture have different words.
Right.
Like there are common words in America that we use every day. We even name people some of the words.
Yeah.
That if you go to England and use them, they're the worst words to use. Well, I don't want to speak over this in case we have any if we have any British audience, it is. Maybe not now, but eventually. I don't.
On the podcast, we probably would.
I don't want to offend anybody, but it also says don't be a stumbling block. But there are several, and there are different. Because I've learned this for anyone who doesn't know, Mid-South Christian College is a bilingual college. We have people from all over South and Central America, where there's just like different people that are Spanish speaking, but it's very interesting. I've been sitting at the lunch table, having listening to conversations in Spanish between several people from Mexico and Costa Rica and the Dominican, and someone will say a word. One of the Mexicans will say a word, and one of the Dominicans will be like, "Did you just say that?
Yeah,
that's a cuss word in our country." And they're like, "Oh, that's not a cuss word in my country." So getting hung up on words, like specific words, changes culture to culture. So if you want to say the Bible is saying don't cuss, what words in the first century do we not need to say today?
Right.
Because they weren't talking about the words that we use.
Well, and it's funny, in English, a lot of those four-letter words that we think are bad, oddly enough, were first created as bad by French versus Anglo-Saxon differences.
Oh, yeah.
And
whichever country you prefer.
Yeah, well, no, what I'm saying is the words like a lot of the words that we have as cuss words, they had the same word as a French equivalent that are okay to speak in English, but the Anglo-Saxon word is the word that became the cuss word. And so a lot of the reason we have the cuss words we do today is because of a racial prejudice between Anglo-Saxon and French words, and so, I don't like buying into that system personally.
So,
but
and there's a whole conversation to be had about cussing and different things. But specifically, it is such a topic in the church. It's a controversy. It's one of those that causes.
It causes division,
right? Yeah. It's a very.
But that's what I'm saying. My whole point is, I don't think that that's talking about this. I think this is talking about when you're slandering someone, when you're saying, "Oh, did you know that this person did this?" And that's awful.
Like 70% of the time you're cussing you're probably doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
You're
that is true.
Probably trying to tear someone down.
Yeah, that is true.
So it's really, and I think just to wrap this up so we can move on, is really the idea of what are you trying to get out of your sentence? Are you trying to tear someone down, or are you trying to build someone up? Because you can tear them down with the rudest words or the nicest words. And you can build someone up the same way. I've heard people hype their friends up in high school and everywhere, and they're cussing, but they're hyping their friend up.
Yeah.
They're building them up.
That's cool.
And they're getting them ready to go, and they're encouraging their friend, And you can do the same without those words too. But it's so. What is your intention with your sentence? And I think that's really what he's getting at. You build each other up with your words. Build each other. Don't put somebody down. Don't be rude. Don't do all of that, because then you're going to cause somebody to struggle with anger, and then you got to go through the list again.
You guys are making the argument that the words that we call cuss words are only curse words if you use them in the wrong context.
Yes. That's my argument. I don't know if you want to come down on that.
I agree with it. I also use the same, don't be a stumbling block. Don't be the person that's going to run someone off from the church because you're always using the words.
Yeah.
But if you stub your toe, you don't have to and say a word. You don't have to go and then repent because you're going to hell unless you repent because of it. It's one of the, because it's your intention. What are you intending? Because if we switch our brains to what are we intending with our words, we'll realize a lot of the sentences we say to people would be a sin, even if it doesn't contain a cuss word.
And I will say it's become one of those ones that non-Christians expect a Christian to judge them on almost immediately.
Oh, yeah.
I was in a context last night where I met a non-Christian, and I was with a friend of mine, and we were talking at a restaurant, and he just struck up a conversation with us, and he was using expletives like every other word. And it was a fine conversation. Neither me nor my friend were offended by it. We knew that he came from this background. But then he asked us what we did for a living. And both me and my friend, I'm a teaching pastor at a church, and my friend is a sound engineer for a church. And so as soon as he found that out, he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I was cussing so much." And it was like almost like he immediately felt like he would be judged for using all of these expletives. And I felt like that's one of the problems we have right now with Christianity is, as soon as we mention anything about where we work at, his immediate fear is that he's going to get judged for who he is. And it might be true. Like I think that he definitely should not be using as many expletives as he was doing. But, for me, I felt really bad for him in that moment, because that's just kind of how it is. So, yeah. Oh, anyway, we'll move on from that. So, chapter 5. Ashley, why don't you read from verse 1 to, let's see here. Let's go to verse 7.
For God's example, therefore, is dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality, or of any kind of impurity, or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore do not be partners with them.
So this is continuing his list of things that he thinks are divisive. And I like that, like my translation says, be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children. And I really like that he emphasizes the idea of, hey, all of us that are in the faith are dearly loved children. And because we're dearly loved, we're supposed to live a life of love, which I think is a beautiful image. It's that kind of, we've been given so much grace, we give that same grace to other people. Yeah. And I think that's beautiful. And I honestly wish the church had that perspective more. I do think that I'll highlight verse 4 here. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking. That one, like, I've known a lot of Christians that when you get them, around a campfire or something like that, they will say maybe racial jokes, will say many things that are offensive to some people. And it's just, that is something that one of the professors here, he tells the story about how he walked into a church and one of the elders at the church made a racial joke that was really in poor taste, and it caused him never to come back to that church. And I think he was right for doing so. Like, I think that there is a bit of that crudeness and coarseness. Not to also get too political, but I think you can criticize some presidents that are no longer in office for that kind of behavior as well from this. And I just think that there is a bit of nonchalance when it comes to that kind of joking, and it's just all male locker room talk or whatever it may be. And I think I think a lot of people have a lot of good points when it comes to the crudeness of that kind of behavior. And we need to watch out for that. So,
because I think it kind of goes along with that saying that, every joke has a little bit of truth to it.
Yeah.
You're like expressing how you really feel. You're just saying it as a joke, so it comes across less offensive.
Right.
It's actually how you really feel. So I feel like when you do something like that, when you're making racially, or anything like that. That's basically that you're basically stating how you feel. You're just making it come across as a joke, so it comes across less harsh.
Right.
You know, that's how you really believe. So I mean, I feel like that you have to be careful with that anyway.
Yeah.
Basically exposing yourself without trying to expose yourself.
Right. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind too. Is and again, remember, this is all in the context of let's keep division from happening, right? So he's highlighting all of these different issues that are the cause to division, and foolish talk and coarse jesting like that is gonna cause division again. Like it's just gonna be the result as you're tearing people down. Let's see, anything else anybody wants to highlight before we move on? What do you guys think empty words is in 6? Let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Like, what would an example be of someone that has like empty words?
I don't know. I guess
What does that strike to you?
I guess I mean that words that have no real. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of something else, so I'm just thought of two different things. It's one of the first things I thought of was like empty promises, like somebody saying they're going to do something, but they're not actually going to come through. And then it also reminded me of something that our pastor taught on about using words that work.
Yeah.
Like using words that actually are going to create something, they're going to build something up, and then you have other words that do absolutely nothing, like they don't produce anything positive. And so something like that, like I also think of empty words as something that like you're speaking, but what you're speaking is not causing anything to grow or to produce anything.
Yeah.
It's not benefiting anybody. So it's either it's doing nothing or it's destroying somebody else or yourself. So when you're doing that, it's like there's no point to it. So it's empty. So.
I feel it's empty words, I think, has a lot to do with the intention behind the words.
Yeah.
So in many ways, it can be, God bless you type things that are just like, well, are you actually prayerfully saying that over my life, or are you just out of habit, not meaning anything? In many ways, this is specifically talking about like, don't be deceived by it, but it's also a warning against those who do it, because it's saying the wrath of God will come on those who do it. It's one of the other examples that's coming to my mind is, I'll pray for you, and you never do. And while that may be, you truly mean to when you say it, that's an empty promise because you never fulfilled it.
Yeah.
An empty promise is one of those that you don't intend to fulfill. It's a warning in an intention. There are places where like, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no.
Yeah.
Is it stick to your words? Don't try to be deceitful. Don't try to say yes but mean no. Don't try to say one thing but mean another, because those are empty words. They don't have any meaning to them. You can also look at it with connection a little bit to that, but also with the whole idea from just the earlier in this section here, and the idea that just let your words have the meaning behind it. Don't. If your words are empty, you're not building up. How can you build up with empty words? So it's more of the intention, I think. Just looking at it. Also, just because I wanted to see what other translations used instead of empty.
Yeah.
I looked at like 6 different translations while they all say empty.
Huh.
I have never seen this many translations use the same word.
I have the King James Strong, which lets you look at the Strong's dictionary.
Yeah.
So in that one it says vain.
Huh.
So that kind of lines up with when I was saying like it was like I looked at the Greek word for it, which I think is pronounced kinos or whatever, and it was saying that it was devoid of truth. It was says things like empty-handed, without a gift, destitute of spiritual wealth. So vain of no purpose and fruitless, like something basically speaking things that don't produce anything or don't produce anything positive, or lying, like, you know, being false, like saying one thing but not actually meaning it. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah, sometimes I've met people that fall into that category where almost all of what they say is just could very much just, it's kind of what, you know, it's almost like it's hard to even put a meaning to anything they say. It's just da 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 da, you know, and it's very it's very unimpactful, I guess, and non-impactful. I don't know if that's a word, but you know, it doesn't have any like sustenance to it's almost just speaking for the sake of speaking. And
you know what that really makes me think of? You imagine this, walk through this scenario with me. All right. You walk into church. It's Sunday morning. Someone walks up. How you doing, Noah? And before you get a chance to actually respond, they're halfway down the hallway.
I really didn't know how you
like that's just a, you know.
I see.
Because, and this is how I take, as somebody who feels emotion stronger than most people would, the idea of someone taking the time to actually care about my answer would make or break my decision on staying at that church.
Yeah, especially if it's your first time there.
If you don't, like, that how are you doing? Has become as meaningless as hi.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's a most like when I ask people how they're doing, I have to now clarify. No, I actually mean for you to give me a real answer. Like, I don't want one word answers. I want you to tell me. How are you doing? And it's sad that in the church and in other places, really anywhere, you can't give, like, if you give anything other than fine or good, then you're like, well, I didn't ask you to overshare. Well, actually, you asked me how I was doing.
Right.
And I'm not doing so good. So if you don't want to hear it, don't ask me.
Yeah.
Is that thing where they like try to like step away from you as you're talking? Okay, cool. Okay, well, I'll be praying for you. Okay, that's
Again, meaningless, empty words, right? And so it's kind of don't be deceived by empty words, but it's also the idea of don't let yourself fall into the trap of giving those empty words, because the very next statement is, because for such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's like, and I think it goes into the whole building each other up thing again, and all the other things that he talks about in this section. That's building unity is showing you care about each other. Don't say empty words if you want to show you care about someone, right? You want your words to have meaning and impact and value to somebody. So you need to have that in them all the time.
And I'll even say on the opposite side of that, of somebody who's always being given empty words. It's like being wary of those people, because I've been around people or a particular person who always had a habit of saying, oh yeah, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then they don't ever actually come through. And I feel like sometimes people will tell you things just to tell you what you want to hear, to just appease you in the moment, and then they're just actually going to come through. And so like being weary of those kind of people who are always empty words.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it is a warning of don't be deceived by people, because if you are too often, like those situations that you just mentioned, someone gives you an empty promise just to make you happy in the moment.
Right.
But then you trust them and they don't fulfill, that leads you right back up to the top of the list of don't sin in your anger. Like, cause you're naturally gonna be like, this person never follows through. I'm so mad at them right now.
Right.
But don't hang on to it. But it's like, in many ways, when you give empty words, you can be a stumbling block into someone's anger, because if they trust you in your empty word and then you don't come through, then that may cause them to slip.
Yeah.
And then now, because of the way you've talked with that person is now dealing with the sin of anger and wrath.
Yeah.
because they're holding on to it because they don't want to trust anybody again.
Right.
And so that you can see how it spirals in many ways like that. And it's, while these do seem like little checklists, like you were talking, like these are like,
don't do
be
this,
the
don't do
good
this.
person kind of checklist.
Yeah.
You really can see, if you look at them all as a whole, they're cycles.
Yeah.
Not only is it like, don't do these things for your benefit, but don't do these things for other people's benefit too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't need to say anything else to that. So he walks through. The last thing I'll mention here is in verse 18. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord. Always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. This one gets used a lot to prevent all alcohol ever. Never touch it.
I was wondering if you were going to bring it
up. No, I'm going to bring it up. No. I mean, this is where we're walking through a book, so we got to do the rubber meets the road kind of thing.
Let's do it.
So a lot of this one's really near and dear to my heart because I have a friend of mine who is very much, I would say, into alcohol, and it's funny. I grew up in a life where alcohol was a sin to even taste, and I've had to walk this line, try to figure out what does Paul mean here, what should my position be on it, and like everything in life, I seem to always find myself in that moderate view of yes and no, and the way that I think that this passage is, what it's saying is, I see that this passage in particular is addressing the fact that a lot of people in this time, you can actually go to 1 Corinthians and see this, so this isn't going to another commentary or anything, but a lot of people were abusing communion, which they would drink wine. And you can see here, I think that you're supposed to read into this situation a little bit, that the reason he's pointing out the don't get drunk on wine is that's leading to this debauchery. And in their context, a lot of times wine soon then led to sexual promiscuousness. They had these events in Greek places where they would have a party, they would get very drunk, and then they would bring in sex slaves after they were super drunk, and they would dance for them, and things would happen. And these Christians would go to these parties, and what follows would be they would get drunk, and then they would, fail sexually. And so a lot of the things that Paul's addressing in this context is, let's not even go down that road. Let's try and not get drunk on this wine in the first place, so that you have more self-control when we get to this debauchery that's going to come, right? And so I love that he parallels this with instead be filled with the Spirit. A lot of this is, I think, calling back to Acts 2, where when Peter and the early disciples have Pentecost and the Holy Spirit fall on them for the first time, the first thing that everybody assumes after they start speaking in all these different languages is they're drunk. And so I think that Paul's kind of riffing off of the fact that to the unbeliever, being filled with the Holy Spirit looks like you're drunk, and riffing off of that and saying, instead of being filled with alcohol, be filled with the Spirit, and kind of making a pun almost there. Yeah.
The Holy Spirit, not the spirit of wine.
Right, exactly. And encouraging them, I think this is beautiful, to speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And there is a general, I will say this, I think anyone can say that being filled with the Spirit is a way better experience than being filled with alcohol. And I know that for true, like from experience. So no, as much as I am not one that comes hard down on that rule and says, I do think that you can have alcohol in certain situations and it be fine. But
Paul even says, I don't know what he says it in, but he talks about drinking a little bit of wine for your stomach.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also you can look at you just gotta. I love the more I learn about the context of the culture.
Yeah.
Because and if you look at the wedding of Canaan,
Yeah.
Jesus' first miracle, everybody at that party is supposedly already drunk,
Yeah.
according to a statement made by one of the party members.
Right.
But one of the things is, how do the biblical authors view wine? As a culture and as a context in that culture, wine at a wedding represented fruitfulness.
Yeah.
Because they're an agricultural
Society,
people, right?
yeah.
Like growing grapes and making wine made them money.
Yeah.
That was a lot of people's business, selling wine. And so that fruitfulness and growth and healthy relationship was represented by wine.
Right.
And so they drank it often in that context as a Jewish people. And so looking in that way is like, don't drink it to get drunk.
Right.
But they drank it all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And one of the, just something else that I've learned that is just kind of goes against the whole wine in the first century wasn't as fermented, which is nearly impossible in the first century. But also this idea that clean water is a very modern concept. If you really think, we struggle today to get third world countries clean drinking water.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How do you think everyone in the Middle East 2,000 years ago drank clean water? They didn't. And so to keep their systems healthy, drink a little wine for your stomach. The alcohol cleansed the bacteria from the water they drank.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They would drink water and they would get sick unless they drank other things to help clean their system. The alcohol was medicine, helped keep their system clean. So he's definitely not saying the whole idea of like, don't ever touch alcohol, for thou shalt be cast into hell for all eternity. He's saying don't do it for evil reasons.
Right.
Don't do it for those wrong. Don't just get drunk.
And again,
first off, if you can't remember what you're doing, how are you having fun? How is that classified as fun?
And again, he's bringing this up because it's causing division in the church, right? And that's why I'm saying don't think of this as just a checklist of how to be a good person. Think of this as, if you do these things, you will be a better and kinder person to your neighbor, right? And I think that's kind of the point of even this. So,
and also, you can't control yourself drunk.
No, you can't. No. Yeah.
So that's
people
often,
think they can, but.
And that's often why they led to so much sexual sin afterwards. But also think about how there are all kinds of sorts of things that happen when you're drunk and that you can't control.
Yeah.
How many people get behind a wheel drunk,
right,
and crash? They didn't mean to crash. That was they couldn't control their body,
right,
and they're making stupid decisions.
Yeah.
Because they're drunk.
Right.
They can't control themselves. They can't think properly. They can't form logical decisions. That's getting into the idea of don't get drunk.
I have thought that this is going to be a little hot topic issue, but I have thought that as particular and as critical as we have been of people that wear masks in public, if we were as critical of people that get drunk behind a wheel, there would be a lot less deaths in the world. Not saying that I think being critical about masks is wrong. I'm not saying that. Don't hear me say that. I think it's good. But I am saying I would like to see that same criticism
for other bad decisions.
You know? Anyway.
Definitely.
Again, so now we move on to a section that's really fun for all three of us because all of us are single, and we're talking about wives and husbands. Oh, I guess you're technically not anymore.
No, I'm single.
Oh, you're single? Oh, okay. That's a whole story. Sorry. I didn't want to offend anyone. Sorry. So yeah, he talks about wives and husbands, and this one's also a hot button issue right now. So I hate these terms, but there are two different terms when it comes to this passage in particular that people debate all year round. The fancy terms are egalitarian and complementarian. And egalitarian means that you see women and men as equals in everything that they do, and they share all the responsibility equally. One does not look to the other in any shape or form as higher than the other, whereas a complementarian sees the man in a role that is a role of leadership in the marriage, and the wife has a role that is a more submissive role. However, they see the two as equal in identity. They just see that the roles are different, and one role is more a role of leadership, and that's how a complementarian would argue, essentially. And so this one is a hot button issue today. This one divides a lot of churches. Ironically, I think Paul wrote this to unify the church, not to divide the church, particularly because in their culture, and you can see this in 1 Corinthians 14, there were a lot of, and I need to do more research on this, but from what I understand, there were a lot of women in the church that would prophesy and were causing certain divisions in the church when they prophesied. You can go and read 1 Corinthians 14 to kind of check what I'm saying there. But you can kind of see in that passage that a lot of the women in that culture were either talking too long or taking up too much of the mic, so to speak, and maybe gossiping a little bit. You know, a lot of different things in the church that were causing these divisions when they would speak about these things. And so Paul, I think, knowing that, writes a lot of these men and women passages to try and work those issues out in the church and try and keep the tensions from being raised in that kind of atmosphere. And so a lot of times when it comes to husbands and wives and things, Paul gets really criticized for how he does appear to be very devaluing of women at times. That's probably one of the number one things I've had to deal with a lot of non-Christians, is they always point to these passages and say, this is why I'm not a follower of Christianity or something. And I don't really think that Paul is situating himself as men are better than women. I don't think that he's situating himself even in that kind of position where he sees husbands as somehow better than wives or anything like that. I do think that there's a lot of context to this, though I will be honest and say I'm still working through some of this stuff. I do think that the complementarian has a point. It does kind of see, and I will be frank and admit I kind of don't like where my normal everyday reading goes when I read this passage. But I don't know. What are y'all thoughts on it? Just overall, I'm curious.
I have, I guess, several thoughts. I kind of wish it was like geared or Nick.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
the married people.
I guess the way that I look at it, and this is also something from my church, because I think before I went to abundant praise, because I've never really heard someone talk about what it really means for for a man to be the head of the house, and what it means for a wife to submit. Yeah. And I think there's a lot that I still have to learn about that. But I know that the way that our pastor kind of explained it, kind of summarized it, was that like when a wife is submitting, it's basically she's submitting to a plan by the husband, and by plan, it's like something that's going to create growth in her life and the life. Yeah. I think a lot of men, not all men, but I think some men, I'm gonna say a lot of men, some.
Appreciate that.
I think that some men like the title of being the head of the household, but they don't know what it really means. Yeah. And I think that being the head of the household means that I make the decisions and people do what I tell them. And they just leave it at that. And I've also heard some people think that being the head of the household means the person who makes the most money. But you also have some married couples where the wife makes more money than the husband. Right. Does that automatically mean that he's not the head of the household anymore? And I don't agree with that either. I don't think it has to do with money. I don't think it has to do with somebody doing what you tell them to do all the time. I think it relates down to verse 25 where it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And like that, I kind of connect that to what our pastor was talking about creating growth. And I think it's the idea that, like, when you get married, the wife is supposed to be better because of you, and so you have to be considering what is going to make her better, not allowing her to submit as in go wash the baby diaper, but it's like considering, like, how is she going to be better because of me and what I'm doing. And then allowing her to submit to that understanding that she's going to be better because of it. Like, she's not doing it just for me. She's like, it's not just for me, but it's also for her. And go ahead.
No, you're good. I want to make sure you finish up. I will say that to that, like, there is an interesting thing where he's relating the dynamic between man and woman to Christ and the church, right? And so if you think about it, man would be the analogy to Christ and the church would be the analogy to the woman, right? And I've always loved this point by C.S. Lewis that he makes in The Four Loves in the Eros chapter, where he says that many feminists would, he feels like, be less severe on these passages if they realize that the man's role as a leader in this passage is to take up the crown of suffering, not a crown of gold, right? Like, it's a crown of thorns that the man takes up in leadership, not a crown of superiority, so to speak. And if you look at how Christ lived his life, it's a life in which he served other people, not lorded it over as I am the Son of God and you must bow down and worship me kind of thing. And so if we are to take the analogy as man is Christ and woman is the church, even Christ's own relationship with the church lives itself out as a man, as Christ being a servant to the church and not expecting the church to just do whatever he tells it to do. Although he does ask the church to do things, you know, he asks the church to obey him, but it's never in that lording it over the church, never in that way of arrogant, higher than authority. It's done through sacrifice and, in a way, himself humiliating himself and putting himself lower. I've always told people that in America it's hard because we really dislike authority figures, because authority figures are have treated us poorly. Like, most people in life I talk to just have somebody in authority that has treated them poorly, and they always make a mental jump that I think is wrong to make, which is, from that jump they say, an authority figure harmed me, so therefore that means all authority figures are bad, and we should just all be equal. And I don't think that's true. I think the most beautiful examples in literature are someone like King Arthur, who has kingship, has authority, but instead of him sitting at the front of the table and everybody else is beneath him, he creates this round table where he is equal with everybody else. He has the leadership to make that call, right? You know, he's the one that calls all the shots, but he, in knowing that he can call the shots, then puts himself at a round table, not at a high throne, you know? And I think that's what you see here is, at least that's how I see it, is as a man, at least, I want to be someone that maybe has been given this position, you know, through this scripture, but it's a position that I will gladly then step down from and offer equality. You know, does that make sense?
And I really think, because a lot of people that are like really negative about this section of Paul, I really think that they stop and just only ever read 22.
Yeah.
Verse 22, they all, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. And they don't even go past that part. They're just like, that's it. And that's so negative to them. For whatever our culture, men and women both struggle with this idea of submitting and obeying other people. But if you really, I had someone point this out to me, as like, while Paul does spend 3 verses talking to women about submitting and why,
Yeah.
He then follows it up with 8 verses on telling men what to do.
Yeah, that's true.
So he spends more time harping on men about doing the right thing to their wives than he does about women.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful section that you read a little bit of, Ashley, that really just starts with, like, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and he gave himself up. It's that the authority that you have has the crown of thorns, not the crown of gold.
Right.
And it's one of those things. I heard it was I think it was a comedian, one who's like, I don't think women understand. They're like, oh, we have it so hard. We have to submit. We have to do what they say. Men have to die. That's what Christ did. His love for the church meant he had to be willing to die, and then did die for the church. And that's the same role men are to wear. We're supposed to be the humble servant leadership. What did Christ do right before he died? His love for his disciples, the first church planters, his love for them was to wash their feet. That's the love. The lowest job in their culture, the Son of God did. That's the kind of love men are supposed to show towards their wife. I would therefore argue that if the man is not following that part of the role, he can't claim authority in the relationship.
Yeah.
Because if he's not upholding his side of the bargain, it's not the woman who's failing to submit, it's the husband failing to give her someone worthy to submit to.
I like that.
It's just as much on the man to live the right way. I mean, Paul spends he spends to the rest of the chapter on men do it right.
Yeah, you're right.
And he tries to, it's going through where it's the same language as in other husbands love he who loves his wife as himself.
Yeah.
If you love yourself enough to give yourself the high and mighty authority figure, you should love your wife well enough to give her the same kind.
Yeah.
Right? It's the love that is given, and the servant leadership is the leadership Christ gave. Because it's the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. Christ as the head of the church is a servant, not a dictator.
Right. And that's really, I think we should end it there, because I
think the biggest unity.
Yeah, I think that's great, and
it's beautiful.
Again, we're all single here, so I mean, we may not understand as much as a married person might, but I do feel like that was a great crack at it. So we are almost out of time, so I do want to finish up 6 really quickly. So we're going to kind of breeze through it. Sorry, but. There are 2 things that the children obey your parents. That one has always been interesting to me, because I think he's working through family issues at this point. I'm sure that something's going on in Ephesus where they must be having some issues with men and women, husband and wife, and also with children in the family. So he's just kind of tackling all that. So of course, after you address the men and after you address the women, you go straight to the children. I don't think there's a lot here to unpack, honestly. I think, pretty much every child has heard it from the moment they were born. Obey your parents. That is true. That is true. And I will say that verse, there's a lot of people I know that need to read verse 4. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Basically, don't provoke your children to wrath. And I see that a lot in the generation that is our generation and the generation before us. There's a lot of tension there and wrath there. And a lot of parents need to look at that verse again and realize that maybe some of the things they're doing are provoking their children to wrath. And that's called into question here. And just as much as the children need to look at their parents and say, I will obey you, there is an expectation. Do you think this applies only to fathers, or do you think this applies to both fathers and mothers? Because he specifically addresses fathers here.
I would say both, only because it's a little side note next to fathers. Mine says a 2 next to it. When you click on it, it says or parents.
Oh, interesting.
I'm assuming that could be like another translation.
Yeah.
To that, maybe it addresses fathers in some translations, because maybe fathers are men are in the house and like what we're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ways that were written in this time, they would just use a masculine noun, and it was kind of assumed that all females were assumed into whatever masculine noun they used. But I don't know. I haven't done as much research on that. So
Yeah, it is very interesting in the and men are oftentimes given the role of training and instructing their children.
That's true. Yeah.
Because in the culture, men were the teachers of their children. The men taught their children how to do things.
Yeah.
In the context of work, the father instructed their children on how to continue the family trade. If your father's a carpenter, they train your children how to be a carpenter. So they're very involved in the training. Cooked.
No,
Not always. No,
there's a lot more
but
to that.
no,
She was kind of the household manager, actually, like especially in the agricultural time. What she would do is she would handle how much food came in. She would handle all the servants. She would handle the children's chores responsibilities. She kind of ran the business side of the family unit, if that makes sense. She handled the money.
Important, but father, because we see a lot of in arts, mother's the nurturer and father's the disciplinary. But that wasn't always the case in the ancient world. A lot of the father nurtured and grew the children, and was responsible for their well-being. And like Noah said, the mothers really were the people that kept the household running smoothly.
Yeah, because if you look at like Proverbs 31, a lot of like that's a lot of evidence of all of the business side of what she was required to do or did in that culture. And you can get it seems like the women were the ones that always went to the marketplace and bought things for the family. They handled a lot of that kind of thing. But
that reminds me of a video I watched where this guy was going around and he was asking people in these really wealthy neighborhoods what they did for a living, and he gets to this house where this woman with little girl answers the door, and he's like, "What do you do for a living?" And she's like, "I'm the CEO of this household."
That's amazing. That's honestly kind of what they were in the first century. They had that kind of job role. But yeah, so we move from there. This probably still to my day is the hardest part of any book when I come to these passages, is verse 5 through 9. The slaves, submit yourselves to your masters passages. I still don't know if I have an answer to this yet. I'm just going to be frank with y'all on that one. I've tried to work through that. I need to read a couple more books on this because it's just one that hasn't been. So I'm going to abstain from making any comments on it because I just don't know yet how I think about it.
The biggest comment I would make is remember that slavery in the Middle East in the first century was not early American slavery.
Yeah.
That would be one big early distinction I want to make.
Yeah.
The majority of slaves that Israel had would have been people who were in really big debt to someone, and they said, "Hey, I can't give you the money. Let me work it off." Yes, yeah. So it's kind of a lot of their slaves were people, and Israel actually had laws that was like after 7 years set them free. And then if they want to re-up, they want to still serve you, then almost like negotiate a new contract with them for another time period. If you really look at it, Jacob did that with his uncle, and his payment was Rachel and Leah. So he worked for 7 years, and that was his payment was he got a wife. But he worked for 7 years. Really, the only pay he got during that was you got a roof, you got a meal, work my land, and then you get paid in 7 years. And so I really, and that goes back to just cultural context. Don't read it with the slavery of American colonists and the early American world. Because if you're reading in that way, you have the wrong image in your head. I'm not saying it was perfect, and I'm not saying everything was hunky-dory, and when I'm not condoning very much, but it's also one of those things that the reason the biblical authors never severely condemned it in that way was because there was not as much of a negative connotation.
Yeah. And I will say there is a biblical scholar, N.T. Wright. We mention him all the time here. He has a whole commentary on Philemon where he argues, at least, that he thinks that Paul and Philemon is anti-slavery, just by Philemon's easy to read. It's one chapter in your New Testament, but it seems to be implying that Paul is leveraging the fact that Philemon is a Christian, and because he's a Christian, he should free Onesimus from his slavery. So this scholar at least makes the argument that Paul at least thought that once you become a Christian, you do have some kind of obligation to rethink the concept of slavery, even though he doesn't go so far as to tell Philemon, free your slave. He does kind of imply it. And so it's kind of, again, like I said, I need to do a lot more research on it because it is hard.
This kind of remind me of the idea of slavery. I think Paul brought this up too. The idea that no matter what, we're all slaves, whether we're slaves to righteousness, slaves to sin.
Yeah.
And I know in Colossians 3:23 he says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And in verse 24, knowing that from the Lord you will receive this inheritance as your reward, you are serving the Lord Christ. So it's like, I guess I look at that from the perspective of, the basics of it, of like serving other people as if you are serving God, because you are technically serving God. Because God looks at it as, even though you're doing that for a person, you're also doing that on behalf of me, because you're doing it in the same attitude or character that I want you to do with it. Reward for that. And it's like, even though they may be talking about actual slavery or indentured servitude or whatever, I think the idea is that, even spiritually, no matter what you do, you're going to be a slave to something. So it's like, pick either to be a slave to righteousness or be a slave to sin. So either way, you're going to be.
Yeah. And I really, you got to give Paul some credit, even in verse 9 here.
Yeah, and I will say, he does tell the masters to
don't threaten them, treat them kindly. So even if he's not fully saying free them, he is saying treat them like humans. Yeah, treat them as brothers and sisters. Treat them fairly. Treat them rightly. Don't screw them over. Don't beat them, don't threaten them, don't, give them their proper food type thing. So it is take care of them, because in many ways, their life is in your hand. And as a Christian, you should care about that. As a follower of Christ, you should care about that. I think he's really getting at that in that way, because for one, he's not just trying to hit them with a big issue of like, okay, now that you're Christians, let's all sell our slave. Let's free them all and just let them be, because he's going to get too much of a pushback in that way, and that's going to cause not unity, right? But instead, he's trying to fix their attitude towards people. You're rich, and there are people who are not rich, but still treat them rightly. And so, as my last comment on this section, don't think of it as early American history slavery. Realize slavery in their context was different, it worked different, and they had different rules and laws regarding it. They were still people. Whereas there were laws in America that made slaves not as valued people, but early first century slaves in the Middle East were still people.
There's a lot more we could go in with that one, but we will leave it there on that. The armor of God is the final section before it ends. Most of you probably have grown up hearing this one. This is the only part of Paul that I remember as a kid because it was armor and a sword and it was fun. But I do think that there are some interesting things here. I pointed this out in a sermon once. The thing about this whole setup is that you're not supposed to attack with this armor. You're just supposed to stand. There's no marching out. He says, put on the full armor of God that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. So, you would think when you put on armor that you would go out and march into war or something like that. But instead, it's a straight just stand against the devil's schemes. So it's literally you just put it all on, let the devil attack you, and that's it. Like, all you have is, you do have a sword, and the sword is to cut through with truth. But, there's never any mention of like antagonistic attacking with it or any type of thing like that. It's straight just standing against the devil's schemes, which I think is remember, this whole book is about unity, right? And so you don't put on your armor to go attack your brother, even if your brother may be being used by the devil right now. You put on your armor to resist that, right? And I think that's the way to unity, is standing against those attacks, cutting through them with truth, sure, but not seeking the other person's death.
In that same line of thinking, it's and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace.
Right.
So when you do move, when you do walk, when you do march, it is in peace, not to attack.
Right. Right.
So your shoes are meant to carry peace with you, not violence and attacking.
Yeah. And I think the early Christian martyrs prove this. You can read stories. Polycarp's martyrdom, I just finished reading, is a beautiful story of just one of the earliest Christian martyrs who was let Rome kill him, really. He tried, he believed that, he should protect himself, but he also loved God ultimately and would not renounce his faith in spite of it. And I don't know, I see so much of the early Christian martyrs must have read this part more than any other, because they were so driven by the idea that no matter what you can do to me in the body, I will not relinquish, and I will not sacrifice my faith, so and I will give a call out to that, as I think as Christians today we can kind of feel bitter even for being persecuted. We can feel like we want to give them back their due. We want to avenge or take revenge, or an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of philosophy. And I think you can see even in this military language of donning all of these protective armor pieces, you can see the reticence to go for that.
It's funny because there was a time period in history where Christians got the opportunity to get back at all the people that had been putting them to death, and doing all them. It's called the Dark Ages. Obviously, we didn't do a very good job. It's called the Christian Dark Ages, the Dark Ages of history. Who was in charge? Well, the church was. The church was in charge, and there were more wars and death and violence because we were able to stick it to them, and it brought nothing.
Yeah.
Didn't the Israelites? Because I know there was a verse in the Bible or something. I don't exactly know what it said word for word, but I know there was a point where the Israelites were getting sold into slavery, and I think Esau, who was their brothers, they saw them getting sold in and basically were mocking them and making fun of them. And I don't know if God came up later on and was like, he did something to punish them for mocking their brothers instead of helping them or warning them.
That's in the book of Obadiah, and I'm so happy that you know that because most people don't read the book of Obadiah. But yeah, it's a one chapter in Obadiah where God basically tells the people of Edom, which are Esau's descendants, that they're going to get judged for laughing and not helping Israel when they got exiled and put into slavery and things like that. So, man, I'm so impressed.
And in the same vein of like, it's like when we're persecuted, don't take the idea of I'm going to get vengeance.
Yeah.
God says, the Lord your God is an avenger. Is somebody who will take vengeance for you. Let him worry about it. You stay focused on obeying and the obedience you're supposed to stay focused on is that spirit of peace. And the same being as Christ is our example. Christ was being put to death and he went silent as a lamb to slaughter.
And that's,
you think about what was going on while he was on the cross, like even when people were like selling his garments, like he's like sitting there watching it while he's like in a immense amount of pain, and he's just like, forgive them for they know not what they do.
Right.
And so I mean, but I think that's just the human nature of people. Like nobody, like I'm not gonna say nobody, but a lot of people don't want to wait on the Lord. God takes his time, and people don't want to take their time. Like they need to be punished today, not 5 years from now.
And I would love to walk through all the different, like, what does the helmet of salvation mean? And like, what do all these different mean? But we don't have time. Sorry, guys. But this has been great. It's been fun. We got to walk through the whole book of Ephesians in 3 weeks. We definitely went over time today. I just wanted to finish it up. So
we went over time.
Thanks for sticking with us. Yeah. Thanks for sticking with us for over an hour and a half. Jacob's going to give the announcements real quick and I will end the stream. Thank you all.
All right, my phone died. So we're going to see if I remember all of the announcements. Let's go. So I want to, again, thank everybody for coming out to our family feast night that we had last week. It was a great turnout. If you missed it, we encourage you to come this week. We're not going to eat again, unfortunately. You're not going to be able to eat. But we are not doing a live stream this Sunday, so you can't watch it online. But we encourage you to come. We're on the campus of Mid-South Christian College. We meet in the Ducka Memorial Chapel at 7 p.m. on Sunday nights. I encourage you, come worship with us in person, hear Nick speak in person, be in the room with us, feel the Spirit move amongst us as we dive into the Word and as we sing songs. And so all of that is coming. Nick is going to be speaking on Ephesians. So if you want to hear more about the book of Ephesians, you can come. He's going to still be speaking on it. And so we really encourage you. I want to see you there. I know other people in the church would also like to see you there. So come worship with us. And that is all of the announcements we have for tonight. And so we'll see you next week on our deep dive, or Sunday night, either one. And see y'all.